Sounds like a sick cow, huh?
I used to have cows.
So, I would like to invite you on a journey. It is a journey, a geographical journey through the Old Testament. It's going to take us about 1,500 years. And it's a journey that is talking about God's covenant relationship with His chosen people, the nation of Israel. It's a journey that will begin in Ur of Chaldees. And interestingly enough, before the journey is over, they will be forced back into the same area in captivity. The story will end with them back in Jerusalem, rebuilding and recommitting their lives to the Lord. It's a bumpy journey all along the way. But it's a journey that has a lot of parallels to us as Christians. And it's a journey that's worth taking because you'll never understand the Old Testament until you can walk yourself through the Old Testament. And that's what we want to do this evening. So if you have your lesson books, I want to have you open it up to the second lesson. And we're going to be looking tonight at a geographical survey of the Old Testament. But before we do that, I thought it'd be good for us to review the books of the Old Testament. Okay? So that's what we're going to start with. And but before we begin, Chuck, would you lead us in prayer?
Lord, we thank you for this time that you give us together to study your word. Father, we pray that you be with Jerry, bless him, and us as a group, Lord, as we look into these studies. In your Son Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, do you remember 5:12, 5:12? Okay, let's do that. All right, the first 5 are written by Moses, and they are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Okay, now that's 5, and then we have 12 books of history. Okay, and they are going to pick up the story actually after the law. What's another word for the law? Torah. Torah. Okay. So let's talk about our historical books. There are 12 of them. Okay, what happened? What's the next book after Deuteronomy?
Joshua.
Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. Stop right there. Okay, by the time you've read through Esther, you've read the Old Testament story. All the other books will sandwich back into that. All right, but then we pick up with 5 books of poetry. 5 books of poetry. What's the first one? Job. Job happens during the time of the patriarchs, back in the time of Genesis. Okay, let's go through the books of poetry. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Okay, how many of those books were written by Solomon?
3.
How many?
3.
Okay, 3. All right, and David wrote about half of the Psalms. And so when you think about the books of poetry, you can think about, with the exception of Job, you can just kind of think about that United Kingdom era that we talked about. That's going to nail us pretty much right where we are. So we've got those books of history, we've got the books of poetry, and then we've got 5 books we call the major prophets, and we have 12 minor prophets. Now the major prophets are major only because they are longer. Major because it's a major task to copy them. And minor because it's more of a minor project to copy those. And that's the only reason we call them major and minor. Let's do the major prophets. What's the first one? Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel. Okay, that's 5 major prophets. Now here come the fun ones. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum. You have to say that real fast. Everybody say Jonah, Micah, Nahum. Jonah, Micah, Nahum. Okay. Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Let's do those again. Minor prophets. Here we go. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum. Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. One more time. Here we go. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum. Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Okay, here we go. All the way through. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum. Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. How many of you got them? Isn't that great? Isn't that great? All right, so that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and jump into some Old Testament geography. And in your lesson for this evening, we're going to be looking at some goals. In this lesson, we want to learn some of the countries of the Middle East in Bible times, learn the location of some important places and events, and begin to learn the major Old Testament geographical progression. And I'd just like to say that you cannot possibly appreciate the historical developments of the Old Testament without a basic understanding of the geography of those times. The student of the Bible must have in his or her mind a picture of where events are taking place in their relationship to the rest of the Old Testament world. And without this very basic knowledge, the student is truly limited. Now I want you to look at this map. You have this one in your notes, and that will be, so everybody try to find this map right here in your notes.
29.
Page 29 in your notes. Page 29. Now the reason we want to point this out is because this is called the Fertile Crescent. Fertile because this is the area where vegetation grew. You'll notice that you have the Syrian desert and the Arabian desert. So if you wanted to go from, let's say, Jericho over to Ur, you're not going to go in a straight line. Because by the time you get part way, you're going to run out of water. And you're going to be in trouble. And so what's going to happen is you're going to go north and follow the Fertile Crescent, and then you're going to come south. Yes, it's a lot longer, but you'll make it. And so that's the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent is important because that's where Old Testament civilization starts. And much of the Old Testament history happens. And there's a place in there, and you might just want to write the word Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers. The land between the rivers. What rivers are we talking about? The Tigris and the Euphrates River. And the land that lay in this particular area had a lot of the cities and a lot of the history of the Old Testament is going to happen in the Fertile Crescent. And so we need to understand that. While you're looking at this map, let's just get our bearings a little bit. Everybody find the Mediterranean Sea. You find that? Okay. And then right above Mediterranean Sea, you see Asia Minor, right? Okay, today what is that called?
Turkey.
Turkey. Okay. And you'll notice on here, Some other things. Everybody find the Red Sea down at the bottom of your map. You see the Red Sea? Okay. Everybody find the Persian Gulf. Persian Gulf. Okay. And let's put your glasses on and see if you can find Nineveh. Nineveh.
Where is it
See it?
at? Right below the orange. Oh, yeah.
Right before the R of Crescent. Right below it. Right. And by the way, what happened at Nineveh? Who went to preach at Nineveh?
Jonah.
Jonah. That's right. All right. Now find, if you can find Babylon. Find Babylon. Okay. You see the word Mesopotamia? Right down there, Babylon. And who went to Babylon?
Daniel.
Daniel went to Babylon. Anybody else? That starts with an E?
Ezekiel.
Ezekiel. All right. And then a whole bunch of captives by the tens of thousands that were deported there. Okay. And so that's good. Now we're going to look at this map. I think I'm losing my signal here. Again, Mesopotamia. And let's look over here. You see the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. And this area in here called Canaan. And you've got Egypt. And you've got the Mesopotamia. Basically, everything happened in the Old Testament in 3 geographical regions. And the space in between them. And that would be, if it didn't happen in Mesopotamia, it happened in Canaan or Egypt or someplace in between. All right, so basically, that's the Old Testament stomping ground right here. Now we're going to add just a few places just for familiarity. I want you to notice clear at the top of the map is Haran. Does anybody know where we run across the city of Haran? Did I hear Genesis chapter 12? That's what I thought.
Genesis
It's where Abraham went when he was on the journey.
That's right.
to find a new land.
Okay, you can move to the front of the class. You're already at the front of the class. All right. So the idea here is that that is where Abraham stopped off on his way
Could you please
to
rephrase that?
Canaan. All right? And then I want you to notice Ur. Everybody find Ur. U-R. Okay? That's where he starts from when he'll be going up there. And then Babylon's on here. And then notice over in Canaan, everybody find Kadesh Barnea. Everybody say Kadesh Barnea. That was a place of decision. A place of decision. And at Kadesh Barnea, they made a very bad decision. And that decision was to not trust the Lord and go on into the land. And so Kadesh Barnea is a very important place. It's also the second place that water came out of a rock. And we'll be talking about that later. Okay, now that helps us out. Some people want to know, well, what's in that area today? And so I just wanted to give you a little map here. You don't have this in your notes, but just to give you a little bit of an idea. We've got Israel, we've got Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq. And by the way, I want you to notice something. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers, you see them on there? They're running mainly through what country? And the Euphrates is also running through Syria and Turkey. It starts in Turkey. What did you say?
Turkey's headwaters.
Turkey is the headwaters in far eastern Turkey. And it's also the headwaters, Turkey is the headwaters for the Tigris River. And so I want you to notice that. All right. Then notice Iran. Okay. The reason I want you to see that the Tigris and the Euphrates are primarily running through Iraq today and Syria and Turkey has to do with when about another map or two from now, we're going to start tracing Old Testament history. Okay, but briefly, in fact, I'm going to skip this map. It's number 13. Everybody know where the Jordan River is. And everybody knows, by the way, this is where the Jordan River starts. The Jordan River starts, the source of it are some rivers, there are 3 of them in the mountainous region of Mount Hermon. And it flows down to the Hula Valley. Used to be Lake Hula. It's been drained. It was drained in the 50s. You may or may not have, if you want to look at map 13, on about page 42 or so, then you can look at that. So I just want you to notice Mount Hermon up there. Notice Mount Hermon. And then the total length of the Sea of Galilee is 124 miles. That's the distance that it travels. But by the time it gets there, it's gone over 200 miles, 223 miles. And it flows down to the sea, it flows down first to the Sea of Galilee, and the Sea of Galilee is below sea level. And so is the Jordan River, and then the Dead Sea is the lowest place on earth, the lowest surface on earth, and it's 1,410 feet below sea level. It's the lowest place on the earth. That's the Dead Sea. Okay. Then, by the way, Lake Hula up there is only 7 feet at the top. It's only 7 feet above sea level. And so there's a huge descent that is from this. I said it was drained in the 50s.
I have Salt Sea where it says Dead Sea.
What's that?
I have Salt Sea where it says...
Okay, so the Dead Sea is called the Salt Sea also, and the Sea of Galilee has several names also. Does anybody know another name for the Sea of Galilee?
Kinneret?
It's called Lake Tiberias today.
Okay, and Tiberias, and there are some other names as well for that. So that's that area. Canaan, well, we're not there yet. First of all, just want to mention 4 rivers that are very important for us. The first one is the Yarmuk River, and at one time it nearly doubled the volume of the water that went into the Jordan. The Yarmuk River is an important river. The second one is the Jabbok. It's the middle one. It's about the middle, a little bit lower than the middle. And the Jabbok River is significant because do you remember when Jacob had to flee? Remember he stole the birthright and his brother was going to kill him. He fled. And when he was coming back, when he was fording the Jabbok River, when he was fording that, he wrestled with the man until daybreak. Who was the one he wrestled with? It would have been the angel of the Lord. Before it was all over, Jacob knew he had wrestled with God. And it was at that point that God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. So that river is important because that's where the name of Israel came into play. The third one, the Arnon River, flows into the Dead Sea, and not a lot to say about it. The Zered River, Zered Brook, is down at the bottom, flows into the bottom of the Dead Sea, and it separates Moab from Edom. And all right, we're going to move on. Canaan, this is the area called Canaan, and it's called Canaan because that's where the sons of Canaan settled. Who was Canaan? Anybody remember who Canaan was? Well, he was one of Ham's sons. Noah had 3 sons. What were they? Okay. Okay? Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham did a vile thing one day. He walked into a tent where his father Noah was, and Father Noah was naked. And Ham enjoyed seeing that. And so he went and told his brothers, "Hey, guys, come over here." And they were appalled that he was looking at his father's nakedness. So they took sheets and they walked backwards so they would never see their father's nakedness, and they covered him up. When Noah woke, he understood what had happened, and he cursed. He didn't curse Ham. Who did it? Who did he curse? Ham's son, Canaan. And Canaan settled in this area. And true to the prophecy, the Canaanites were subjected to the Israelites later on. So, all right. By the way, the Dead Sea down there at the bottom, we've already mentioned it. It's 33% mineral. The content of the Dead Sea is 33%. As I mentioned, it's 1,410 feet, and it's not recommended that you leave your bicycle in the Dead Sea. There are good reasons. It just doesn't, it's not a good place to park your bicycle. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move through this. We're going to start our actual journey through the Old Testament, and we're going to start our journey down in Ur. And so, if you have your Bible, open it up to Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12. And in Genesis chapter 12, we get the story of what's going on. Actually, the last part of chapter 11 helps us, and then chapter 12. And so what's going to happen is in chapter 12, we're going to get the call of Abraham. And that to me is just a very interesting area for us to think about. Okay, so Genesis chapter 12. Somebody read verse 1 for me.
The Lord has said to Abraham, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you.
All right, very good. So he's asked to do, right there, is the first command. There are actually two major commands in the call of Abraham. In each of the commands, the first command, if you do, then this is what I will do. And the second command, if you do, this is what I will do. Now most translations don't carry the second, don't translate it in a way that you understand that it's an imperative. So we want to point that out tonight. So the first thing that's happening here is it says that the Lord had said. It is a pluperfect. The Greek, the Hebrew here should be understood as a pluperfect verb. Now, pluperfect is something that happened in the past before some other things happened that also were in the past. And so it takes you a step back in a narrative. So if I said, I bought my house, but earlier I had looked for a house. The earlier I had looked for a house is the event that happened first. Okay? And so when he says here, the Lord had said to him, it's because the had said happened back in Ur, not in Haran. That is an important thing for us to understand. God had said to Abraham, Abraham, get yourself out from your country and okay, from your country, from your people, and from your father's house. Get out from those things and go to a land that I will show you. So the first imperative is actually two parts, and it is leave and go. It's this verse 2 is also an imperative, but it's usually not translated that way. Dr. Alan Ross has 2 doctorate degrees. He has a THD and a PhD, and he's an expert on the Hebrew language. And he points out in his article in the Bible Knowledge Commentary that in verse 2 you have another imperative, and it is, be a blessing. Be a blessing. And if you do become a blessing to others, then what happens? What will God do for him?
Make you a nation.
I'll make you a great nation, and I'll bless those who bless you, and I'll curse those who curse you. There are 3 results if you obey the second command. Okay? So it's important that we understand in the Abrahamic call there were 2 conditional things. Abraham, there are 2 things I want you to do. Now this had happened when he was back in Ur. What we don't know is how long ago it was. We don't know how old Abraham, or Abram is still at that point, Abram was when that call came to him. He might have been a young man. In fact, I've thought sometimes it might be possible that Abram received that call as a young fellow, and he doesn't obey right away. And that may be the reason that he and Sarah have no children. It could be the reason why God withholds children, because I'm going to make of you a great nation. That can't happen until you obey what I'm saying. Okay? And so, finally, let's go back to chapter 11, and the last few verses of chapter 11 will help us to understand what's going on here. You notice verse 27 says, this is the record of the generations of Terah. He became the father of Abram. Now look at verse 31. Terah took Abram his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went out together from Ur of the Chaldees in order to
enter the land of
enter the land of Canaan. And they went as far as and settled there. Now there's something wrong with that picture, isn't there? So apparently what happened is Abram's father, Terah, is the patriarch of the family. And one day the Lord spoke to Abram and said, get out from your country and your people and your father's house and go to a land that I will show you. Joshua 24 tells us that that Abram's family, Terah, was an idol worshiper. Now it makes sense. Why? Get out from your father's house and go to a land that I will show you, and it's going to be you and me, Abram. But apparently, Dad is kind of the patriarch of the family. I can almost imagine that day. Father, I've had a message from the Lord, and He says that I'm to move to another place. Yeah. I'll tell you when you can leave.
Over my dead
But
body.
I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll all move there. Now that's not the deal.
No.
Because they would be bringing their idolatry with them. Right? So that's not the deal. And so here's what happened. They moved up to Haran, settled there, and I don't know how many years they were up there. They could have been up there 10, 20, 30 years. Who knows? And finally, Dad dies. Yeah, at 200, I think I'm up there a long time. Yeah, could have been up there a really long time. But here's the thing I want you to see. It's not until Dad dies that Abram takes the next step of obedience. And then he will be moving down to Canaan. Okay, so we've got Abraham moving up to Haran, and then the next movement that takes place is... Oh, well, I could have gone through those slides, but we didn't. All right, so they went down to Canaan, and in Canaan, okay, now he's in the promised land. Eventually he separates from Lot, and when he does, the Lord appears to him again, and this time he says, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make of you a great nation. I'm going to give you. Lift up your eyes, Abram, and look around you as far as you can see. I'm going to give you this land, your descendants after you. Okay. And then Abram has, we're going to fast forward a little bit, and so Abram has a son, Isaac, right? And Isaac has Jacob and Esau, but we're not going to talk about Esau. So we have Abraham has Isaac, Isaac has Jacob, and Jacob has how many sons? 12, and one daughter. And son number 11 was Joseph. And Joseph received some dreams from the Lord. Now this is interesting to me. God told Joseph in a dream that he was going to rule over his brothers. In fact, he gave him another dream that he was not only going to rule over his brothers, but over his parents as well. Now that's not just something that, what shall we say, Joseph dreamed up on his own. It wasn't a result of pepperoni pizza or something. It actually was prophetic, and it was actually the will of God, and he was showing it to him at that point. Now I have a question for you. Why did God tell him ahead of time you're going to rule over your brothers?
Because of what was going to be coming to pass. Because of what was going to be happening in his life before it got there. So you have a promise to hang on to.
Yes. His brothers all thought that was a pretty good idea because they thought he would be a pretty good ruler over them, didn't he? That wasn't what happened. And so, yeah, he was next to the last. So they hated him, and they sold him into slavery into Egypt. Okay? They sold him into slavery into Egypt. And so we've got to get our map going here. Okay, so now we've got him down in Egypt. So far we started in Ur, wound up in Haran, came down to Canaan, had a few generations come by, and now we've got Joseph down in Egypt. In 1876 BC, the rest of the family, that would be Jacob, and all the rest of the brothers and their wives and children, all moved down to Egypt. Because there's famine in the land. Come on down and we'll take care of you. We've got grain stored away. All right? And so they're going to come down there. So in 1876 BC, they moved down to Egypt. It will be 430 years later that they will leave Egypt. Under who? Moses' leadership. That's right, under Moses. So anyway, they're down there, and Joseph is a prime minister and all of that. All right. Well, there arose some pharaohs that did not know Joseph, and the nation had grown to about 2 million people. And the pharaohs were afraid of the Israelites, and so they put them into slavery, making brick and building projects. And they cried out to the Lord, and the Lord heard them, and he raised up the deliverer, and his name was? Moses. And now you're in what book of the Bible? Exodus. You're now in Exodus. Okay. And so then God brings Moses back from the backside of the desert, and he's going to lead them out. And so the next movement that they have, oh by the way, they did not cross the Red Sea. I want to just point out that the Hebrew text that's translated Red Sea is not Yam Adam, which would be Red Sea. It's Yam Suf, meaning Sea of Reeds. And that's important that you know that, and why it's translated as Red Sea, I don't know, and a lot of people don't know, but it's translated, it's mistranslated, Sea of Reeds. What we do know about the Sea of Reeds is it was such a deep water that it drowned all of the Egyptian army. And so we don't even know where the Sea of Reeds is. We don't know. But there are a lot of speculations about it. Some think it was the Bitter Lakes, and I don't know where it was. All right. Then they go down to Mount Sinai. In the traditional location of Mount Sinai, we have down here, they go down to Mount Sinai, and they get the law. Now we're still in the book of Exodus. They get the law. They build the tabernacle. And while they're getting the law, Moses is gone for a while, and what do the people do?
Make a golden calf.
Made a golden calf and worshipped it. And they had to deal with that. Moses had to deal with that, didn't he? God sent him down off the mountain, and he dealt with that. Okay, and then, so they got the law, and they built the tabernacle. They worshipped that golden calf as a big mistake. And there's something else. They entered a covenant with God as a nation. It was put out before them, will you enter this covenant? And the people said, yes, we will do all that the Lord our God says. Well, that was quite a promise. And they didn't exactly keep that promise. But that's what, that was the intent. So, after they've done those things, it's time to leave and to head toward the promised land. And so they leave and they go to Kadesh Barnea. And at Kadesh Barnea, now we're in the book of Numbers. And in the book of Numbers, we read about them sending spies up. And they went, if you notice in the text, they went way up into Syria. Way high up into Syria. And then they came back and they gave a report. What was the report they gave?
Giants.
Yes. Oh, indeed it is a land flowing with milk and honey. But there are giants in the land, there's no way we could ever conquer them. We look like grasshoppers to them. This step on us. So the people voted no. I like to think of it like this. All the way from even before they crossed the Reed Sea, before that, God was proving himself. You have all of those plagues in Egypt where the Israelites could just watch the power of God, that he is so powerful, he overcomes anything. They get to the Red Sea, or the Reed Sea, and here's this body of water, and what are we going to do? Moses, you brought us out here. Weren't there any graves in Egypt? Brought us out here to die. They're flunking every quiz along the way. They come to a place, they don't have water. They grumble. They don't have food. They grumble. They want meat to eat. They grumble. They grumble on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, grumble on Wednesday too, grumble on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, grumble the whole week through. And every test that comes along, they don't remember the faithfulness of God and the power of God in the last test. Let me tell you something. God has already in your life done some incredible things, hasn't He? Yes. Don't you have some answered prayers? Things that you can hang on to? You ought to write them down in a little notebook. Write them down. Because if you don't, you're going to forget them. Write them down. Because that forms a little booklet of your faith. And you can go back, when you hit a trial next week, you may need to go back and read the notebook. Right? Because that is going to show you how God has already taken care of every other problem that you've had. And now can He take care of this one? Are you going to trust Him? And Israel flunked every quiz. They came to Kadesh Barnea. This was the final exam. Guess what? They failed the course of faith. They had flunked every faith quiz. Now they flunked the final exam. And God had them wander in the wilderness for how many years? 40. At that point, it's 38 years left. They've been 2 years up to that decision. And the total will be 40 by the time that they finish with this. Okay? And so that's where they're at. So Kadesh Barnea. So the next thing was they were going to wander in the wilderness, and then they wound up at Mount Nebo and the plains of Moab. And now we are at the book of Deuteronomy. And Moses gives the law to the second generation. That's what Deuteronomy is about. He gives the law to the second generation, and they receive that, and then God takes Moses up on Mount Nebo, and Moses dies, and God buried him. And then Joshua takes over in the leadership, and guess what book we're in now? Joshua. And so we crossed the land, and the first initial victories take 7 years. But Joshua reigns over them for several more years. But the conquest was incomplete. And so it was followed by a crisis. What's the book after Joshua? Judges. And the book of Judges is a time where, let me go back. In Joshua, they had 3 campaigns. They had a central campaign to begin with, and then a southern campaign and a northern campaign. But the conquest was incomplete. And because of that, they had anarchy. There was no king in Israel, and everyone did that which was right in his own eyes. And they all said, we want a king. So at the last of the judges and the first of the prophets was Samuel. Guess what book we're going to be in now? 1 Samuel. And so we'll take several chapters to get there. But eventually we get to the point where they are saying we want a king, and God says, go ahead and give them a king. It was not the will of God that they have a king. God was to be their king. They were supposed to be a theocracy, but instead they wanted to be a monarchy. They wanted a king. And so God said, you go ahead and appoint that. And so God selected the first king, which was Saul. He reigned for how many years? 40. And then he died, and then David was the second king, and he reigned for how many years? 40. And then King Solomon, his son, came to the throne, and he reigned 40 years, and he died. That was 931 BC. Everybody say 931. 931. Okay, the Exodus out of Egypt was 1446. Everybody say that. 1446. That's exit out of Egypt. And now, Solomon's death is 931 BC. Now would you open up your Bible to 1 Kings chapter 11. What happened to this man who had been the wisest man that had ever lived? And what happened to the wisest man that ever lived?
Too many wives that led him into idolatry.
Yes. He had many, he loved, it says, many foreign wives. You know, love does some things to you.
I just don't know how he handled all of them. I can't even fathom it.
I think about Proverbs 4:23. Guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life. The wellspring of life. The wellspring of life. Guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life. Proverbs 4:23. That's for me. Let me tell you something. Your heart is a stupid thing. It'll fall in love with anything. You have to guard your heart. Guard your heart. And Solomon did not guard his heart, even though he wrote the book of Proverbs I just sang out of. Okay, so, but Solomon loved many foreign wives, it says. And so they turned his heart away from the Lord. And so God judged him. And how did God judge him? What does it say? 1 Kings chapter 11. What does it say?
King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites and the Hittites, the nations
Okay, I want you to drop down to verse 9. Now the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. But he did not observe what the Lord had commanded. And so the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this and have not kept my commandment, my covenant, and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely do what? And give it to your servant. So right here, the kingdom will split, but it is the split is a judgment of God upon Solomon because he led Israel into idolatry. He built altars to those idols. And so God judges him, and he tears away 10 of the tribes, and they will go to one of his servants. And so Jeroboam will be the first king of the north, and Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, will be the king of Judah. And that'll all unfold in chapter 12. But just so you know where that's going, let's say, so the kingdom split. This is just showing you the extent of the kingdom and how far they reached. And I wanted you to just simply notice that under Solomon's rule, they reached all the way to the Euphrates River in the north. He had territory that reached all the way up there. So he died in 931. 10 of the tribes seceded from the Union. And now you have Israel in the north and Judah in the south. In the divided kingdom era, there were 20 kings in the north, and they were all ungodly. There were 20 kings in the south altogether, not just including the divided kingdom era, but the single kingdom era followed. There were 20, and there were 8 good ones. The capital of Israel, they had 3 capitals actually, but it wound up finally being Samaria. And the capital of Judah was Jerusalem. Okay, in 722 BC, the north went into captivity to Assyria. Okay, in 722, what happened?
Israel is exiled to Syria.
The northern tribe, Israel, goes into captivity to Assyria, not Syria, Assyria. What's the date?
722 BC.
What happened in 931? Solomon died. What happened in 1446? Exodus out of Egypt. Okay, what happened in 722?
They went to Egypt.
722? Syria comes down and takes the northern tribe Israel to Assyria. There is no return. The south lasted longer, but they went finally into captivity. There were actually 3 deportations to Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar. And I won't go there yet. The first one was 606, and Daniel was taken, and his 3 friends. Now guess what book we're in? Daniel. Okay. And then 597, Ezekiel is taken, and you can read about that. Ezekiel. And then in 586, Nebuchadnezzar comes to Jerusalem, besieges the city, finally breaks the walls down, and anybody that can walk goes into captivity. He destroys the temple and the city of Jerusalem so that it's uninhabitable. And so that is the end of the kingdom era. Jeremiah prophesied that they would be in captivity for how many years? 70. And they're in captivity for 70 years. There are 3 returns, and they rebuild the temple, and they rebuild the altar, and then finally they rebuild the city walls, and that's the end of the Old Testament. Now, we're going to do it real fast. We started in with, what was his name?
Abraham.
Okay, at that point, just Abram. We go up to Haran. Father Terah dies, and they come down into Canaan. Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. Jacob has how many sons? 12. Son number 11 is Joseph. Joseph is sold into slavery to Egypt. And then, because of famine in the land, the rest of the family will join them. They go down. The whole family moves to Egypt in 1876. They will leave 430 years later, right? Okay, so they're down in Egypt. They're down in Egypt for 430 years, and then God raises up a deliverer named Moses. And he leads them, after a series of plagues, leads them out of Egypt, and they go down to Mount Sinai, where they get the law. They enter a covenant relationship with God. They build the tabernacle, and along the way they build a golden calf. Finally, they leave Mount Sinai and go up to a place of decision called Kadesh Barnea. And at Kadesh Barnea, they send 12 spies into the land, and they go all the way up into Syria. And they spy out the land, come back, and the people vote no. We want to go back to Egypt. We're going to appoint another leader and go back there. We'd rather be slaves. God won't let that happen. But that generation will not enter. And so they wander for the next 38 years after that to make it a total of 40. They wind up at Mount Nebo. Moses gives the law to the second generation in the book of Deuteronomy. And then Moses goes up on the mountain and dies. Who takes over? Joshua. Leads them across the Jordan. They have a central campaign, and a southern campaign, and a northern campaign, but the conquest is incomplete, so they have a crisis that follows for the next 300 years. There are judges that judge the land, and then the last of the judges, the first of the prophets was Samuel. And Samuel leads them, but finally, when he's an old man, the people say, we want a king. And so God says, okay. So the first king they appointed in the United Kingdom era was Saul. And the second king was David. And the third king was Solomon. And they all reigned for 40 years each. When Solomon died in what year? 931 BC. When he died in 931 BC, the kingdom split. The north is called
Israel.
The south is called Judah. The north goes into captivity in 722 BC. The south lasts longer, and we're just going to go to the last one. 586. The city is destroyed. The temple is destroyed. They are deported to Babylon. They're there for how many years?
70.
They return under Zerubbabel and Ezra and Nehemiah and rebuild the altar and the temple and the city walls, and that's the end of the Old Testament. Let's do it real quick. Can we do it in 2 minutes? Let's see if we can. Okay.
No.
Haran, Canaan, wait a minute. In Canaan, we've got Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. Jacob has how many sons?
12.
What's number 11?
Joseph.
He's sold into slavery to
Egypt.
In Egypt, they're there for how many years? 430 years. They're led out by
Moses.
They go to Mount
Sinai.
They get the law. They enter a covenant with God. They build the tabernacle. And along the way, they build a golden calf. And then they leave there, go to a place of decision called Kadesh Barnea. Send how many? 12 spies up in the land. Spies come back and say, yeah. No. So, the people vote no, and they wander in the wilderness, book of Numbers, for how many years? 40. Altogether, 40. And in the last year, they are at Mount Nebo. And Moses gives the law in the book of
Deuteronomy.
to the second generation. Then he dies. Who takes over? There's a central campaign, a southern campaign, a northern campaign, but it's incomplete, and so we have 300 years of crisis. But we have judges, and they lead the people. The last of the judges and the first of the prophets was, and he appointed the first king, who was Saul, and the second king, David. And then the third king was okay, they each reigned for 40 years. And in what year? 931 BC. Solomon died. The kingdom split. The north is called Israel. The south is called Judah. North lasts until 722. They go into captivity to Syria. The south lasts till 586, go into captivity to return how many years later? And rebuild the land. They rebuild the temple, resume the sacrifices, and that's the end of the Old Testament. Isn't that great? Now you can walk yourself through it. Isn't that great? You can do it. You can do it. That's great. Yeah. Would you lead us in prayer? Let's pray.
Father, we come before you this evening. We thank you for Pastor Jerry and the years of study and diving into your word that he's done, and how he has developed a way to be able to bring it to us tonight and all these Sunday nights. Just help all of us to be faithful to come, to be prepared to learn, and to gain wisdom and instruction and guidance from your word. Just bless us each with just something that we can really take away from this, that will bless our lives, and we can bless others with, and bless the food we're going to have this evening. Just give us a good week this week, keep us safe, and we just ask all these things in Jesus' name.
Don't forget to get a copy of the next 2 weeks' lessons, if you didn't already.